Get ready for a spine-chilling experience. If you love feeling your heart race and the suspense creeping into the room, you're in the right place. But before we begin, I have an invitation for you. If you truly have the courage to face the unknown, go ahead and hit that like button now and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any terrifying stories. Share this video with someone who also loves the thrill of fear, but be careful. The scariest things tend to happen when you least expect it. Are you ready to face what's coming next? Let's see if you can handle it. I remember everything clearly, as if it were yesterday. My father arrived home again, drunk, his heavy footsteps echoing in the entryway. I hid in my room, listening to the screams and the sounds of things breaking, the kind of noises I knew so well. My mother, Julia, tried to calm him down, but he was out of his mind. I knew that the next day I would find the chairs overturned, the broken glass on the floor, and my mother looking tired, her face marked by tears. It was a routine that seemed to have no end. That night, however, something was different. My mother screamed in a way I had never heard before, a scream that made the air in my room thick with fear. I curled up in bed, with the blanket pulled up over my head, wishing it would all end. When silence finally returned, I heard my mother sobbing softly. After that day, everything changed. She decided she couldn't take it anymore, and that we needed a safe place, away from all the chaos. Deep down, I just wanted peace, but something told me that this was just the beginning. The next morning, we left the house without looking back, carrying only a few suitcases and the remains of a broken family. My mother told me that we had found a new home, and that now we would have peace of mind. I wanted to believe her, but a part of me was already scared of what would come next. We said goodbye to everything we knew, and the journey to the new place was made in silence. I clung to the toy I brought, trying not to think about what we left behind. I thought everything would be fine, but the unknown was just beginning to surround us. When we arrived at the new house, I felt a shiver run down my spine. It was an old building, with peeling walls and windows that creaked with every breeze. My mother smiled, but her eyes were distant, as if she too had her doubts. We walked in, and the first thing I noticed was the silence, not that peaceful silence, but the kind of silence that seems to be watching, waiting. Deep down, I wanted to believe that we were safe, but something in that house was already bothering me. The first night, my mother helped me tidy up my room. She tried to cheer me up, talking about how we could paint the walls, pick out new furniture, and make the space a home. But as she spoke, I felt a strange presence in the room, as if someone was spying on us. The bed was old, the mattress creaked with every movement, and the wooden floor creaked when I walked. My mother kissed me goodnight and, before leaving, said that everything would be fine now. But I couldn't convince myself of that. As soon as I was alone, I felt a strange weight in the air, something I couldn't explain. I lay down, pulled the blanket up to my neck and closed my eyes, trying to ignore the bad feeling. However, with every second that passed, the feeling that there was something under the bed grew stronger. An icy cold took over my body, and I couldn't move. I could have sworn I heard low, almost imperceptible breathing coming from beneath me, as if something was just waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. My heart was pounding, and my breathing became labored. At that moment, I decided that I needed to make sure everything was okay, that there was nothing there. Very carefully, I lifted my head and tried to peer between the space of the bed and the floor, but it was too dark to see anything. The darkness seemed solid, impenetrable, as if it hid a secret I should never discover. I closed my eyes tightly, hoping to fall asleep soon and forget that feeling. However, it wasn't long before I felt something cold touching my ankle. I screamed, and my mother ran into the room, asking what had happened. I told her about the strange feeling, about something that seemed to be watching me from the dark. She tried to calm me down, saying it was just my imagination, that it was normal to be scared in a new place. I felt a little safer with her there, but something told me that what I had felt was real. That night I tried to sleep again, but the thought that something was under the bed kept me from resting. The next morning, the fear of last night felt like a bad dream, but the image of that shadow under the bed wouldn't leave my head. So I decided to investigate on my own, even though part of me wanted to pretend that nothing had happened. I knelt by the bed and looked into the dark. Nothing seemed out of place, but the feeling of something watching me was intense. For a moment, I thought I was imagining it, but the discomfort was too real to be just in my head. I got even closer and slid my hand down to touch the floor, wanting to feel if there was anything there. That was when I saw, in the corner, something strange. A dark mark, like a stain that seemed to pulse slightly. My heart raced. It was a handprint, but not just any hand. It was small, almost my size, but its shape was distorted, with long, thin fingers, as if they didn't belong to a human being. I immediately removed my hand and walked away, trying to understand what that meant. I stood there, staring at the mark, not knowing what to do. I wanted to tell my mother, but I knew she would say it was just dirt, that there was no reason to worry. But that stain was real, and the feeling that something was watching me came back, even stronger. I decided to ignore it and left the room, trying to forget what I had seen. However, the image of that brand never left my head, and with every step I took, I felt like I was being followed. During the day, I tried to distract myself by playing in the yard and exploring the new house. However, the shadow in the room seemed to follow me, and I couldn't concentrate on anything. Every time I passed through the hallway, I felt a chill, as if the room were alive, pulsing with a strange energy. I didn't want to sleep there anymore, but I also knew I had no choice. It was only the first night, but I already felt that the house hid much more than I could imagine. Night came faster than I would have liked, and my fear returned with it. My mother put me to sleep and left the room, leaving only a small light on in the hallway. I lay down, trying not to think about the mark I had seen under the bed, but it was impossible. The silence became heavier, and with each passing moment, the feeling that something was watching me intensified. I closed my eyes, hoping that sleep would come soon, but all I could do was feel my heart beating even faster. It was then that I felt the cold touch on my ankle again, like a cold, thin hand trying to pull me into the dark. I screamed, and my mother came running, asking what had happened. This time, she looked worried, as if she was finally starting to believe something was wrong. I told her about the touching, and her eyes widened, but she soon calmed down and said she would stay with me until I fell asleep. Despite my fear, I felt safer with her there by my side. With my mother close, I managed to fall asleep, but the sleep was restless, full of nightmares in which pale, thin hands reached out from under the bed to pull me. I woke up in a cold sweat and saw that my mother had left the room. I was alone again, and the shadow seemed even more present, as if it knew it could reach me now. Every noise in the house sounded like a whisper, a low laugh, as if something was making fun of my fear. Suddenly I heard a sound coming from under the bed, a faint but constant sound, like someone was scratching the floor. My entire body shivered, and I knew I didn't have the courage to look. That sound continued, and I shrank even more, trying not to make any movement. In that instant, I knew I was no longer safe there. Something or someone was under the bed, waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. Finally, the scratching sound stopped, but an eerie silence took over the room. I was paralyzed with fear, unable to move a muscle, my eyes fixed on the wall in front of me. It was then that I heard a low voice, almost a whisper, calling my name. Jorge. The voice seemed to come from under the bed, as if something was really there, in the dark, waiting for me. I closed my eyes tightly, trying to block out the sound, but it was impossible. The next morning, I tried to tell my mother about the voice I had heard, but she just looked at me in disbelief. She thought it was all a nightmare, that my fear was just part of being in a strange new house. I knew it wasn't a dream. That was real. Still, she promised to leave a light on in the room to make me feel safer. But I had already given up hope that a simple light could drive away whatever was under my bed. During the day, I tried again to look under the bed, but the darkness seemed even thicker. Instead of just a void, I could almost see the shape of something, a shadow that moved slightly, as if it were breathing. I was paralyzed, fear almost making me faint. There really was something there, a presence that seemed to grow stronger and stronger. I left the room hurriedly, breathing heavily, and my mother asked what was happening. But I knew if I told her it wouldn't do any good. Every time I returned to my room, that feeling of being watched returned, and the nights became unbearable. I began to feel cold hands touching me as I slept, squeezing my arms and legs as if they wanted to pull me. With each passing night, the ringing became stronger and the voice clearer. Jorge, the voice whispered, repeatedly, as if trying to hypnotize me. I could no longer distinguish the dream from reality, and the feeling of madness began to approach. It was then that I decided to try and talk to the thing. At night, when the cold touch returned, I asked, in a trembling voice, "Who are you?" For a moment, the room was silent, and the feeling of waiting increased. Then the voice responded, almost like a distant whisper, "I was here before you. This is my home, Jorge." My heart raced, and I huddled under the covers, trying to ignore the horrible statement. But deep down, I knew it was telling the truth. The next day, I tried to talk to my mother about the history of the house. I asked if anyone had lived there before us, but she just said she didn't know and that it didn't matter. However, my fear was growing, and I knew I needed to find out more. The feeling that something was calling me, pulling me to a place I couldn't return from, grew stronger every day. I decided to investigate on my own, so I began to notice details that had previously gone unnoticed. I found a small door at the back of the closet, almost hidden between shelves and boxes of old things. It was locked, but it looked like it had been used many times before. I asked my mother about the door, and she just said it must be an old pantry, but there was no point in touching it. However, at night, I would hear noises coming from inside it, as if someone was trying to get out. A shiver ran through my body, and the whispering voice returned. "Jorge, release me." This time, it wasn't just a request. It was an order. Something under the bed and inside that door was calling to me, and I no longer had the strength to resist. Each night became a battle, and I began to see shadows moving in the room, dark figures watching me. I no longer knew what was real or imaginary, but I was sure I was losing control. The thing under the bed wanted to come out, and I felt like I needed to help it, even though I knew it could destroy me. Each night, the whispers grew louder, echoing in my head until I nearly went crazy. It was as if the entire house was alive, every wall whispering, every shadow watching. I was stuck in a cycle of fear, but something inside me started to change. I no longer knew who I was, and a part of me wanted to join that voice, wanted to understand what it was. Maybe if I opened the door, everything would finally make sense. Maybe then I would find peace. On a cold night, I couldn't resist. I waited for my mother to sleep, and when the house was silent, I got up with slow steps and went to the closet. The small door was there, almost as if it was waiting for me. As I approached, I heard the sound of light knocking coming from inside, as if someone was trying to get my attention. I felt my body freeze, but my mind was in a trance. All I could think was that I needed to open that door. I tried to turn the handle, but it was locked. It was then that I heard the voice again, now clearer than ever. "Jorge, open it for me. I am waiting." My hands were shaking, but something guided me. I found an old key among my mother's things and, without hesitation, I put it in the lock. The door slowly opened, revealing a small, dark space. In the background, something was moving, a shadow that seemed to want to get out of there. Before I could react, I felt cold hands pulling me into the closet. An invisible force held me, and the darkness seemed to swallow me. The entire room was distorted, and I could no longer distinguish reality from the nightmare. The thing that was there whispered words I couldn't understand, as if it was taking me to another world, a place where fear was all that existed. My mind blended with the shadows, and I began to see faces, others who, like me, had been called. I wanted to scream, but it was like the air was trapped inside me. The feeling of losing control was complete, and I knew that if I continued, I would never return. The dark pulled me towards its heart, and, deep down, I felt like I no longer had a choice. I was now part of that house, part of that secret. Even if I tried, The thing wouldn't let me escape. We were united, and I knew it was only a matter of time before I became one with the darkness. After that night, I was no longer the same. Something in me had changed profoundly, and I felt as if the thing under the bed was now inside me, as if we were the same entity. The shadows didn't just watch me. They followed me, surrounded me wherever I went. My mother noticed that I was quieter, more apathetic, but she didn't understand what had really happened. Each night, my desire to go back to the closet and open the door grew stronger. The marks on my body started to appear. There were dark spots, almost like bruises, that spread across my arms and legs. My mother thought I was hurt, but there was no pain. They were marks of the thing, of the presence that now lived in me. The whispers no longer just came from the bed or the closet. They echoed in my mind, calling me, tying me more and more to the house. I knew something was taking over me, and that soon I wouldn't be the same. Over the next few nights, I began to have visions of the distant past. I saw children running around that house, their faces pale and empty, as if they were already dead. I saw shadows crawling through the corridors, shadows that seemed to wait for something, for someone to free them. And I understood that my presence there was not by chance. The house had chosen me. I was just another person to be lost in that abyss, another one to be consumed by the darkness under the bed. Each night, the transformation intensified, and the marks on my body increased. I was no longer able to recognize my own image in the mirror. My face was pale, my eyes were dull, like those of the shadows I saw in visions. My mother tried to take me to a doctor, but I knew there was no solution to what I was experiencing. I was becoming one with the house, and soon there would be nothing left of me. On a moonless night, I heard the definitive call. It was as if the entire house was calling me, as if all the shadows were waiting for my final decision. I got up from the bed, slowly walking to the closet, where the small door was open, revealing the densest and most threatening darkness I had ever seen. The thing was waiting for me, and I knew that when I entered, everything would change forever. My body was shaking, but there was no way to back down. I entered the closet and felt the air close in around me, as if the house was feeding on me. The shadows moved, enveloping me in a darkness that seemed to have a life of its own. The faces I had previously seen only in visions were now there, all around me, watching, waiting for me to take my place among them. I was now part of the house, and she was part of me,